Hello once again, Planet, and thank you so much for listening to Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim helps you fight the devil in the details in English and win. In this week's 4-part episode for B1, B2, and C1 students of English, I am going to talk about 20 different things. I'm going to talk about kt, ft, pt, st, sht, cht, rkt, bd, gd, ld, md, nd, rd, vd, zd, lvd, rmd, rnd, njd, and urged. Okay, that's all of the 20 things I'm going to talk about. All of the things that you just heard me say, and which probably sounded a lot of the times rather strange, all of those things are called consonant clusters. A consonant cluster is two or more consonants that are pronounced together without any vowels between them. For example, the two consonants b and d together create the consonant cluster bd. Consonant clusters are typically pronounced very quickly, which is a point I will come back to a bit later. English has consonant clusters with 2, 3, and even 4 consonants, one right after the other. You can hear consonant clusters at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of English words, but in this episode, I want to focus on consonant clusters specifically at the ends of words. The reason why I have chosen to focus on the ends of words will become clear in just a second. Now let's listen to each of those clusters, the 20 clusters that you heard a minute ago, not alone, but as parts of words. So again, there are 20 of them. 1. Liked. 2. Laughed. 3. Hoped. 4. Passed. 5. Washed. 6. Watched. 7. Parked. 8. Grabbed. 9. Hugged. 10. Called. 11. Named. 12. Opened. 13. Answered. 14. Loved. 15. Amazed. 16. Solved. 17. Harmed. 18. Burned. 19. Changed. 20th and last, charged. So, I think after hearing those 20 words, you can understand why I want to focus on final consonant clusters. It's because they are key in not just correctly, but also easily understanding and pronouncing the past tense forms of verbs, and specifically regular verbs, although we can also find consonant clusters on the ends of irregular verbs and also on the ends of nouns and adjectives too. But our focus again will be on consonant clusters at the end of regular verbs. So irregular verbs, ones like go with past tense forms went and gone, so go, went, gone, these are the verbs that students tend to study the most. It's understandable that students focus on these difficult irregular verbs, but students also need to work on regular verbs. Regular verbs seem to be easy, but in reality, they are harder than people think. A lot of my students at B1, B2, and occasionally even C1 level simply forget to use the past tense forms of verbs and just use the present tense instead. Although when we look closer, it is not the case necessarily that they forget. There are other problems at work. In other words, that it's difficult to pronounce these. So I've seen situations where students really think that they did use the past tense forms when they were speaking, but in fact, they were using the present the entire time, or part of the time. Now, after my students have spent some time speaking, and sometimes or often not using the past tense when they need to, I tell them about their mistake. And the dialogue between myself and my student goes something like this. So I say, so you spoke really well, but sometimes you forgot to use the past tense. You used the present instead. Student replies, no, that's not true. I used the past tense. Weren't you listening to me? And I answer, well, actually, I heard the present tense a lot of the time. You, in fact, did not use the past tense. Student replies, really, that's super strange. And my final answer is yes, and a lot of the time you made this mistake with regular verbs, and that really surprises people. Now, you personally, coming back to reality, coming back to us, you might be thinking right now, well, I really just don't think that consonant clusters are a problem for me. I pronounce them without any difficulty, and I'm sure I pronounce the past tense forms of regular verbs correctly. And you know what? You might be right, but you also might be wrong. And it is true that it's typically speakers of languages like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Vietnamese that have the most difficulty pronouncing consonant clusters. But it is not only speakers of these languages that have problems with clusters. I have a fair amount of European students who have problems with clusters at the ends of words, even though European languages also do use clusters. So regardless of what your first language is, there are 3 reasons people have difficulty with end-of-word clusters. The first difficulty happens before people even speak. Consonant clusters are typically pronounced very quickly, so quickly in fact that people don't hear them correctly. For example, someone says a word ending in a cluster with 3 consonants, and the other person hears only 2 of them. This could happen, for instance, if someone says helped with lpt at the end, and the other person hears just, instead of lpt, they hear just lp or lt. So when a person has this problem, it makes them misunderstand what other people are saying. It makes them less able to imitate or copy what others are saying, and it makes it difficult for them to listen to and analyze their own speech so that they can correct themselves when they make mistakes. Okay, moving on to the second difficulty. The second difficulty is that people simply don't say the last sound of the cluster. They throw out the t or d sound. They seem to do this typically because they aren't paying attention, or because they're trying to speak fast, or also because they simply haven't learned how to make the cluster yet. Their mouths have trouble making the movements. And indeed, those movements, when you make a cluster, they are very rapid. That is something I will probably deal with in a future episode, but it really is impossible to do it because there are so many clusters. Can't do it in this particular episode. Anyway, the third and final difficulty that people have is that speakers of some languages, for example, Spanish, German, Polish, and Russian, have general problems with voiced final consonants. When they need to say tried, they say trite. When they need to say changed, they instead say changed. This difficulty arises because these languages do not have words that end in voiced consonants. Okay, this has been a lot of theoretical information. And now that you have this information, we are ready to move from part 1 to part 2 of this episode, from theory to practice. So let's take a closer look, or rather listen, to these consonant clusters. Let's separate them into groups and start with unvoiced consonant clusters. Let's remember that the unvoiced sounds are f, p, and s, and also sh and ch. After these sounds, the d or ed ending, is pronounced as t. So again, not as d, but instead as t. So that gives us 6 consonant clusters. Kt, ft, pt, st, sht, and cht. Can you easily say each of these? Let's try now. I will say one of the clusters, and you will try to copy it during the pause. And then I will say another cluster until we are finished. 1, kt, 2, ft, 3, pt, 4, st, 5, sht, 6th and last, cht. So, were you able to say all of them easily without adding a vowel between the consonants? For example, did you say kt or kit? Did you say pt or pit? If you said 3 sounds instead of 2, so if you added a vowel there, then your pronunciation of consonant clusters is not like what a native does. Is that such a tragedy if you don't speak like a native speaker? No, it isn't, but it can make you harder to understand. So also, if more accurate pronunciation is your goal, then you need to be able to say not just individual clusters, but also put the clusters at the ends of words and use those words in sentences. Now listen to 6 examples. Each one will start with a verb in the past tense and then a sentence with that verb. 1. Liked. Yeah, I liked the movie. 2. Laughed. We laughed for hours. 3. Hoped. I hoped you would say that. 4. Passed. He passed the test. 5. Washed. Who washed the dishes? 6th and last. Watched. We watched the game on TV. Okay, now let's try something a little more difficult. Let's now practice clusters not with 2 consonants, but with 3 consonants. There are several consonant clusters with 3 consonants, but there is only one that is found in really common verbs. That cluster is rkt, R-K-T. Now listen to 3 examples, each with a common verb and then a sentence. 1. Parked. We parked behind the stadium. 2. Worked. They worked till 10. 3rd and last. Barked. Our neighbor's dog barked for hours. Okay, that is all for consonants with an unvoiced last sound. So now we can move from part 2 to part 3 of this episode, from unvoiced sounds to voiced sounds. So right now we will talk about regular verbs ending in single-voiced consonants. So verbs that end in b, g, l, m, n, r, v, and z. So there are 8 of them. And when we add the ed past tense ending after these sounds, we pronounce that ed ending as duh. And like I said earlier, it is very hard for speakers of Spanish and German, and also many, if not all, Slavic languages to make voiced sounds at the ends of words. And it gets even harder to make these combinations when you need to make 2 voiced sounds. So here are the combinations. Bd, gd, ld, md, nd, rd, vd, and zd. And now 8 verbs with these clusters and 8 examples. 1. Grabbed. He grabbed his books and left. 2. Hugged. My baby hugged me tightly. 3. Called. They finally called Tom back. 4. Named. My parents named me after an uncle. 5. Opened. Who opened the window? 6. Answered. No one has answered my question. 7. Loved. My mom loved to bake cookies. 8. Amazed. Your stories amazed me. Okay, I think you can predict what we will do next. We're going to learn about voiced consonant clusters that have 3 consonants in them. We have 5 clusters. We have ulvd, ermd, earned, nged, and urged. Listen to them once more now. Ulvd, ermd, earned, nged, and urged. So, 5 verbs in 5 examples. 1. Solved. Has anyone solved the problem? 2. Harmed. Fortunately, no one was harmed. 3. Burned. Oh no, I've burned dinner. 4. Charged. Have you charged your phone? 5th and last. Changed. Please don't change your mind again. Okay, that's the end of part 3. Now let's move to the 4th and final part, which is going to be rather different. We are going to shift our focus from consonant clusters at the end of regular verbs to a different pronunciation problem that students have with regular verbs in the past tense. So far, I've talked about unvoiced and voiced consonants, but I did not include two sounds. Those two sounds that I did not include are t and d. So when a verb ends in either of these two sounds, the d or ed ending is pronounced id. That is two sounds, not one. So for example, the past form of want is wanted. That seems pretty simple, but I do hear mistakes still, 3 of them actually. First, sometimes people just say the base form. They want to say wanted, but instead just say want. Second, sometimes people try to kind of double the final sound. They try to say wanted. But no, the correct form is wanted, needed, excited, started. So remember, after t and d, the ed past tense ending is pronounced id, with 2 sounds, not 1, but 2, id. Now listen to 8 very common verbs ending in d or t with the past tense ending id on the end with sentences. So, 1, started. The movie started late. 2, expected. We expected someone to help us. 3, included. The price included tax. 4, wanted. We wanted to leave early. 5, decided. Has anyone decided where to go? 6, waited. We waited for hours. 7, visited. We've already visited that museum. 8th and last, ended. Has the episode ended yet? And the answer to that last question is yes. That is all for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and see you all next Monday.